In 1898, the Bayer Pharmaceutical Company, the same company that makes the aspirin in your medicine cabinet, launched a new product. They called it heroin. That was the brand name, trademarked, printed on the bottle, marketed in 12 countries, advertised in medical journals as a safe, non-addictive substitute for morphine, recommended by doctors for tuberculosis, bronchitis, and, specifically, children's cough medicine. The name came from the German word heroisch, heroic, because the patients who took it reported feeling heroic, powerful, invincible. That feeling, it turned out, was addiction. Bayer knew this within years. They kept selling it for over a decade. This is not a story about evil. It's a story about something more dangerous, a brilliant chemist, a profit motive, and a system with no mechanism for stopping either one until millions of people were already destroyed. Heinrich Drieser was Bayer's head of pharmacological research in the 1890s. He was not a villain. He was a scientist operating within the assumptions of his time, that chemistry could solve human suffering, that new compounds were progress, that addiction was a moral failing rather than a physiological mechanism, and that if a drug worked, working was enough. In 1897, one of his chemists, a man named Felix Hoffmann, was attempting to synthesize a less irritating form of morphine. Morphine was the primary painkiller of the era. It worked. It also created dependence in a significant percentage of patients, which was understood as a character flaw in those patients rather than a property of the drug. Hoffmann synthesized diacetylmorphine. In the lab, it appeared to be everything morphine was, but stronger, faster acting, and with fewer reported side effects in initial tests. Drieser was given the compound. He tested it. He was impressed. He named it heroin and recommended it for commercial development. The same year, Hoffmann synthesized another compound for Drieser, a painkiller derived from salicylic acid, less harsh on the stomach than existing formulations. That compound was aspirin. Bayer launched both in the same year, heroin first. Drieser considered it the more significant discovery. Aspirin second. In Drieser's professional judgment, heroin was the major product. He was correct that it would be significant. The medical establishment of 1898 received heroin enthusiastically. This requires context. In 1898, germ theory was still relatively new. Antibiotics did not exist. Tuberculosis was killing hundreds of thousands of people a year in Europe and America, and nobody knew how to treat it. The main symptom that destroyed patients' quality of life was the cough. Constant, bloody, exhausting. Heroin suppressed the cough, dramatically and immediately. Patients who took it reported not just relief from coughing, but a transformation in their overall feeling. Energy, optimism, a sense of well-being. Doctors began prescribing it widely, not just for tuberculosis, for bronchitis, for asthma, for general respiratory complaints, for pain, for anxiety. For what was then called neurasthenia, a catch-all diagnosis for people who were exhausted, depressed, or simply not coping well with modern life. The Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, one of the most respected medical publications in America, published a glowing review. The reviewer noted that heroin appeared to be non-habit forming. This conclusion was based on weeks of observation of patients who had been given the drug. Addiction to opiates typically takes months to fully manifest. Bayer's marketing materials made the non-addictive claim explicitly. Heroin, they advertised, was safe for long-term use, safe for elderly patients, safe for children. The children's cough syrup formulation was one of Bayer's best-selling products within 3 years of launch. The first signs of a problem appeared almost immediately. Within 2 years of heroin's launch, physicians in Boston and New York were reporting something unusual. Patients who had been prescribed heroin for coughs were returning, not because their coughs had returned, but because they wanted more of the drug. They described discomfort when they stopped taking it, anxiety, physical pain, sleeplessness, cravings so intense they disrupted normal functioning. The doctors wrote up these cases, published them, used words like habituation and dependence. Bayer's response was to commission studies showing the drug was safe. The studies found what they were designed to find. By 1902, independent physicians across Europe and America were publishing case reports of heroin addiction. The pattern was consistent. Patients prescribed heroin for legitimate medical reasons, given the drug over weeks or months, developing physical dependence, continuing to use it not for medical benefit but to avoid withdrawal, escalating their doses as tolerance developed. These reports were not secret. They were in mainstream medical journals. They were discussed at medical conferences. Bayer continued selling heroin until 1913, 15 years after launch. In those 15 years, they sold it in 23 countries. They continued advertising it as non-addictive until the evidence against that claim became impossible to ignore. They continued marketing the children's formulation until public pressure made it politically untenable. When Bayer finally stopped, they didn't stop because of the science. They stopped because heroin had become associated in the public mind with street addicts, and the association was bad for the brand. The man most directly responsible, Heinrich Dreiser, retired comfortably in 1914. He had become wealthy from the royalties on heroin and aspirin. He spent his retirement in a villa. He died in 1924, 16 years after the evidence of heroin's addictive properties had become undeniable, having never faced any professional or legal consequences for his role in creating and marketing one of the most destructive substances in human history. Felix Hoffmann, the chemist who actually synthesized the compound, spent the rest of his career at Bayer working on other projects. He is remembered today mainly in pharmaceutical history texts. He never expressed public remorse about heroin. He did express satisfaction about aspirin. The patients who became addicted, the tuberculosis sufferers, the anxious housewives, the children given cough syrup, were not compensated. They were not acknowledged. They were described in contemporary accounts as weak-willed individuals who had failed to use medicine responsibly. The addiction they experienced was understood by the medical establishment that had created it as a personal failure. What happened after Bayer stopped selling heroin is its own story. The compound didn't disappear, it moved. Street chemists in New York, London, and Shanghai discovered they could produce it cheaply from morphine. By the 1910s, illegal heroin was available in most major cities. By the 1920s, heroin addiction had become one of the defining social problems of urban America, concentrated in poor neighborhoods, among populations with no access to treatment and no political voice. The Harrison Narcotics Act of 1914 had technically regulated opiates in America. In practice, it transformed addiction from a medical problem into a criminal one. Addicts who had previously obtained their drugs legally from pharmacies now obtained them illegally from dealers. The price rose, the quality fell, the associated crime rose with it. The pharmaceutical company that had created the problem faced no liability for any of this. In 1925, the League of Nations banned international heroin trade. By then, illegal manufacturing and distribution networks had been established across 3 continents. The ban moved the product underground. It did not move it away. The heroin that Bayer launched as a children's cough remedy in 1898 has killed, directly and indirectly through overdose, disease, violence, and the social destruction of addiction, millions of people. The current estimate for the number of heroin and opioid addicts worldwide is approximately 40 million. The opioid crisis consuming America today, the fentanyl deaths, the devastated communities, the life expectancy numbers falling in regions where no life expectancy number should be falling, is a direct linear descendant of the decision Heinrich Dreiser made in 1897 when he looked at a new compound in his laboratory and decided it was ready to sell. There is a detail about aspirin that most histories leave out. Dreiser initially resisted aspirin. He thought heroin was the important product. He delayed aspirin's commercial development by over a year because he was focused on heroin. When aspirin finally launched and became one of the best-selling drugs in history, saving millions of lives, reducing fever and pain across a century of use, Dreiser received no royalties. Hoffmann had synthesized it. But the royalty structure at Bayer gave Dreiser a percentage of products he personally championed. He had championed heroin. He had delayed aspirin. He made his fortune on the drug that destroyed millions of lives. He made nothing on the drug that saved them. Bayer still exists. It is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, with revenues of approximately $43 billion in 2023. The word heroin, Bayer's trademark, was seized by the United States government after World War I as part of war reparations, along with the trademark for aspirin. For a brief period after the war, any American company could call its product heroin or aspirin because they were no longer protected names. Aspirin survived. It became a generic term for the drug used worldwide. Heroin survived too. Bayer's brand name for diacetyl morphine, chosen because it made patients feel heroic, became the universal name for the drug in every language on Earth. The company that created it moved on, made other products, grew larger. The name stayed. A trademark that outlasted everything its creators intended. and became instead a monument to what happens when the profit motive, the absence of regulation, and the certainty of scientists who don't yet know what they don't know collide in a laboratory in 1897. The aspirin is still in your medicine cabinet, so is the lesson.